Hello again, Urban America. Welcome to your Key Concepts video coming to you from my NJCU office. So we will clearly be developing these concepts throughout the entire semester, but I wanted to take the opportunity to get you thinking. And this is what we do in lecture, but here you are watching a lecture from the comfort of your home. Maybe you're on the bus, wherever you are, just put your headphones in and learn, listen, and get ready to read your textbook. This is, by the way, our very affordable textbook if you rent it, and it is where every key concept that we develop in this course can be found in some way, shape, or form. We will be doing things in the classroom, we will be doing things online, and you can always find some reference to it as well in the textbook. So, our book begins with Native American cities as well as colonial cities in Chapter 1. And as a key concept, I want you to think of the city as a tool of empire. A city is a foothold, it is a beachhead. In the colonial era especially, cities were places where mighty empires such as the Spanish and the British and the French were able to get a spot on the eastern seaboard and establish their power, their claims of control, but also establish some longevity. Those colonies that did not make it did not have a large enough city. They did not have enough people. Very famously, places like Jamestown or Roanoke struggled. Even the Pilgrims, even the Mayflower colony, they struggle when they first arrive in Massachusetts or what have you. A city, if it is built in a place like St. Augustine, Florida, or of course New Amsterdam, which became New York, once it gets a critical mass of people, buildings, foodstuffs, supplies, weapons, it becomes an established part of an empire's presence on the new continent. The other key idea of the city as a site of empire, conquest, and power is that this was not brought to the United States or the territories soon to become the United States by Europeans. Native Americans did this, especially through trade, establishing their power by setting up a city through which they governed in many ways and controlled and ruled massive regions. So as you read in Chapter 1 about the Cahokia settlement, the great mound city in modern-day Illinois, think of that as the seat of power. Think of that as establishing in a certain way, a different way, a Native American empire of trade. So this is an important lesson, and as we follow cities, we will get much more international with the settlement of the Spaniards, the French, the Dutch, and the English in North America, but also going in other directions as we move through the course. Powerful nations such as the UK and Portugal will establish cities in present-day India, and thereby claim control, have access to the seas, send out all kinds of merchant boats and naval vessels, and use the city as a tool of empire. The Americans do this in Shanghai. The Germans show up in China. There are many, many cases of a city existing and even flourishing as a tool of empire. So think about that. Think about the cities that you have visited, that you hope to live in and visit, and consider that all of the major cities in the United States had some aspect of power attached to them. Maybe it was industrial power in a place like Chicago and Pittsburgh. Maybe you control the price of beef out of Chicago, but you're going to have a lot of power, and that will be something we explore throughout this semester. Key concept number 2 for the early stuff, especially the colonial era prior to the founding of the U.S., is the importance of rivers. Rivers are the absolute lifeblood of U.S. cities, and in its heyday, New Orleans at the base of the Mississippi was a contender. It was really a dominant location for the entire southern United States, because if you look at maps of the Mississippi River as it feeds down with many, many hundreds of small streams and tributaries, it really is a regional river system, and all of those goods flow right down to New Orleans. You can say New Orleans, but it's more fun to say New Orleans. So let's talk about New York City. New York City sits at the mouth of the Hudson River, the wide, swift, easily navigable Hudson River. If you get a good sail going, you can go straight on up that Hudson into what we now call upstate New York, and this is a huge, huge resource for New York City, first founded as New Amsterdam for the Dutch, and then later adopted as a city of New York for the British when it was conquered by the British. The river makes the city, at least in the early days. And even as you follow this concept, we'll be doing a lot on the Erie Canal and the importance of that canal to the ongoing growth and dominance of New York City. This is still, even though it's man-made, an invented river. The Erie Canal going from the Great Lakes across to the Hudson, which goes down to New York City. This is still, in a way, it fits the river theme. So this will be very, very important prior to the invention of railroads, and it's something to consider that each city has an artery which is feeding it. And that is a very useful concept to have in the back of your mind as you read about each new city. The city is also a contradiction, and this is something that will be fun throughout the semester because I want to keep you guessing. The readings will certainly keep you guessing. And what I mean by this is that a city is a contradiction between incredible concentrations of power and control, but also incredible bursts of freedom and spaces of freedom. And this was true both in the colonial era and even up to the present day. This will be a theme that stays with us constantly, the contradiction between power and freedom in the city. And there are many, many examples that we will explore. I'll just hit a few as we introduce these concepts. We have slave riots, slave rebellions, uprisings, slave conspiracies, some of them real, some of them imaginary, and they were overwhelmingly organized and launched in cities. In colonial cities in which slavery was allowed and slavery thrived at these slave markets, even places like New York City, which had its own slave market. The concentration of free blacks and enslaved blacks in the same spot allowed people to organize, allowed people to rebel, to riot. And so in this way, there is a sense that the city has a more opportunity, more chances to get your people together. The Irish do this. African Americans do this. Even going as far forward as the 20th century, it is in the great city of New York that gay and lesbian people first riot against the police and establish their rights in 1969 at the Stonewall Riot to not be arrested simply for the fact that they are gay or lesbian. So that theme of the freedom to gather and protest and riot and establish your rights is absolutely there. It is absolutely real. Many political movements have gotten a boost from the mass populations of people within the city. Women gain the right to vote largely because of urban women. Urban women have parades, they have marches, they get connected to politicians, they talk to newspapers. That is a very ongoing, ever-present theme or concept throughout our course. The power of the city to give power to people and make changes in American society. However, this is a contradiction. Because just as there are big masses of people standing up for their rights, the city is also a seat of government. They say, as a phrase, you can't fight City Hall. You've heard it. Well, you've heard it now if you haven't heard it. You ever seen that? You can't fight City Hall? It's a very, very funny little joke because there's a lot of truth to it. There is a lot that the city can do to control its population, and forget about it if you're like a state capital or if you're in the capital city of D.C., Washington, D.C., it is unimaginable how much federal power is concentrated within those cities. Cities are places where you're constantly under surveillance in the 21st century. We're always being filmed. Everyone has cameras on every street corner in Manhattan. Cities have a tremendous number of police and state troopers and all kinds of authorities and power figures that maybe would contradict our sense of the city as a place of freedom. So I just thought I would start with that and let you think about it, marinate a little bit with the idea that cities have these contradictions and will continue to have them throughout this course. Last concept, and this video is going to be less than 15 minutes, so YouTube doesn't get annoying to me. They have different rules for the 15-minute plus. So I'd like to introduce the concept that cities have been, but are not always, more progressive places, more open-minded places. And so I'm not talking about state power, I'm not talking about police power or controlling citizens in that sense. Let's talk about cultural freedom. There are absolutely trends in which men and women are able to be single. They are able to be free. They're able to have divorces, operate businesses as a widow or a widower. This is something that is more possible in the city. The cultural freedom to date who you wish, to live with whom you wish, and to live your life culturally as you see fit is definitely more alive in the city. So this is something we kind of know instinctively if you grow up in a super conservative household, or you're trying to get away from controlling parents or relatives or whatever is in your life, and you get your own apartment in the city. Jersey City, doesn't matter, Manhattan if you're feeling fancy, they can't stop you from living your life. And this has been true from the colonial era all the way through to the 21st century. So there's a lot of history in our text. There's a lot of stuff about cultural movements and societal changes that come out of the freedom of the city. There is a lot of anonymous life in the city. When I go to the grocery store, I could buy, an entire shopping cart full of apples or an entire shopping cart full of Oreos. Sorry. And no one can stop me. No one would care. No one would even know my name. Maybe one of you will be there and you'll be like, Professor White, why is your shopping cart filled with Oreos? And I'd be like, leave me alone. I'm not Professor White. The city, if I go to enough grocery stores, if you go to enough restaurants, if you live your life in the big bad city, you're going to be an anonymous customer. You're going to have the freedom to buy what you wish, to live how you wish. And there is this liberating side to the anonymous city. So that is one thing to consider about the city as a progressive place, as a culturally free place, is that no one knows who you are. You could reinvent yourself, and that will be ever present in our course. The other side of that coin, however, is that cities have been places where people get attacked. And this is the seamier side of the anonymous city. It is sadly true, and it has been true pretty much for all of American history, that in the city you are more likely to get murdered by a stranger. You're more likely to get attacked, mugged by a stranger. People in the subway might turn their backs and watch and not want to get hurt themselves. They'll leave you to whatever the criminals are up to. And so there's this danger in the anonymous city. And this is where the city ceases to become progressive. Cities are the site in American history of some of the worst racially motivated attacks in our nation's history. It's really sad. There are cases, and I'll just use one example very quickly. In the Civil War, in the 1863 Civil War draft riots, African Americans were attacked in the streets. They were beaten, and some of them were killed at a time where the Irish were rising up against the Civil War draft and feeling like they were being drafted into a fight which was not their own. And so there was a competition for jobs. There was a lot of local tension in New York, and the city was literally ripped apart. Buildings were ripped apart as people were attacked, and the Irish and African American communities were really, really at odds with one another. It was a sad, very depressing, very violent chapter in July of 1863, and that is because it was in the anonymous city. These people did not know one another. If you're in, Podunk, small town USA, You're not going to go down the block to Farmer Joe's house and, beat him up. You guys are in a rural environment and people tend to know each other, and it's very hard to attack someone recklessly like that. So, key concepts. I'm going to cut it off before 15 minutes. Thank you for watching. You're almost done.